Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and we just got back from Gamescom, and one of the key titles that we saw on Xbox One X was an extended demo of Forza Motorsport 7, and John Linneman is joining me to talk about it.
Hi Rich, how's it going?
Not too bad. First of all, thanks to everyone who came up and had a chat with us at Gamescom, particularly when we were bored out of our minds in the lines. Much appreciated, it was great to meet you all. But yeah, let's move on to the main topic here, John. Forza 7. So, the content of the Gamescom demo, in many ways rather familiar, but there was a kind of surprise addition too, right?
Yeah, that's right. They added, I believe, the Sonoma track to the mix, removing the racing trucks that were present in the E3 build, and it was basically a chance to see a new environment with some cool dynamic lighting and weather effects, which we'll talk about in a moment. Looked great, I thought.
Yeah, and we also got to see the PC version of the game.
That's right, exactly. It's the first time I think that I've played it on the PC then.
Yeah, that's correct. I think this was the PC debut for the code. Well, you know, Gamescom, Germany, it's a huge PC territory, so I guess they felt kind of obligated to show it, and I was quite impressed with what I saw. Now, what you're seeing on screen here is Xbox One X footage. But, well, John, the PC version was remarkably close.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a little funny to say that because you would expect the PC to match or exceed it. But one of the areas I think that really stood out to me, at least, was that the anti-aliasing was different between the two games.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite perfect conditions for doing a comparison because they were running on different screens.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I thought the Xbox One X had the kind of edge there.
Yeah, it looked like the PC version was using a slightly sharper but more aliased form of AA, so thin objects in particular, like fences and power lines and whatnot, were rather shimmery looking on PC, whereas on Xbox One X, it was relatively clear and stable.
Yeah, I think it was just sort of less shimmer in effect there. I mean, I believe that the Xbox One X and indeed the Xbox version of Forza 7 uses EQAA anti-aliasing, which is like a Radeon-specific AMD technology, and that probably wouldn't be available on the PC version. The PC version typically that uses MSAA in prior Forza products, so I suspect it's exactly the same here.
Yeah, and that might explain why it's specifically thin objects that were a little shimmery, since the rest of the image looked absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, okay, so let's move back to that Sonoma track with I think it's the Radical RXC turbo car that we've got here. And we actually managed to grab some capture of this so you can see how it all runs, and it is looking really, really nice. But first of all, it is just a time trial course in the demo. I'm sure you can play it with other cars, other opponents in the full thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually got 2 or 3 different runs of this particular track, and you can see here variation in time of day. So we've got kind of like a broad daylight scene here, and the same content running at dusk, sunset, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right, and I asked them about that when I was playing the demo for capture, and they did say that at least some of the tracks do have the full dynamic time of day and weather and cloud pattern system in place. So while you're racing, you will actually see things change, but also every time you load up a track, their plan is to randomize conditions so that it feels like you're playing a slightly different variation of the same track every time you play the track, rather than just going through the same motions as you always do, right? So I think that's kind of a big improvement then, because in the past, especially Forza 5, the game felt very static, where you just load up the track, it looks identical every time, nothing to it, but it looks like Forza 7 is really putting a lot of there's a lot of effort that has been poured into making sure that the game feels more dynamic.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's kind of brought to the fore on this Nürburgring track here, where we're kind of moving between different weather conditions and different time of day conditions kind of simultaneously. So as you move around the track, you get a much wider range of variety, and I think that's kind of what the users have been asking for from Forza for quite some time. So Forza 6, you did have wet weather condition racing, but it was entirely baked in. It wasn't in any way dynamic, whereas this time they've really pushed the boat out.
Right, so I mean, in that sense, they're catching up to the competition, I think. I mean, Gran Turismo's tried to implement this stuff in the past, not always perfectly successfully, but there it is. And of course, Project Cars, I think, was doing similar stuff a while ago.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's more about the implementation here that I like, because both of those games on consoles definitely exhibited performance problems in the past, where Forza is here doing it all at a rock solid 60 frames per second. And for a while I was thinking there's no way they can do the same level of performance and actually include things like dynamic environment shadows and whatnot. So the fact that they are doing that, even if we're not yet clear on how it's been achieved, it's pretty impressive to see, I think, and it definitely improves the experience.
As you say, it's performance that is the key here, and one thing we haven't done in our coverage today is actually to run all of the Forza 7 footage that we have through our frame rate tools. So I did that, both the Gamescom footage and the E3 footage, and well, I do know that Turn 10 Studios will be watching this video based on what they told me when I was in Seattle and met up with those guys. They are very eager to ensure that that frame rate line does not deviate in the slightest from 60 frames per second. And well, we're watching the video now and it is completely and utterly locked to 60 frames per second. Not a single dropped frame in the many thousands of frames that I actually ran through the analysis tools here. Yeah, we can talk a bit about that. When I met up with Turn 10, they were talking about how they actually budget every sort of major element, and everything has to fit within that budget, and it all kind of combines. So there is, you know, a max 16 millisecond render time. It's actually a bit lower than that. They leave a bit of overhead for stuff like dynamic effects, particles, that sort of thing. But yeah, the discipline there, the level of optimization, and the fact that they've now managed to cram dynamic lighting and weather into that tiny 16 millisecond time slice, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I feel like from here then, the only place I could see them pushing forward is one area where I feel like every racing game has let us down lately, and that's both menu systems and replays. It sounds a little bit strange, but going back to Gran Turismo 3, which is now quite old, everything ran at 60 frames per second. The menus, the replays, the whole game was 100% 60 frames per second, which felt great. But once we got to the PS3 generation, none of the racing games were doing that, and that includes Gran Turismo. And of course Forza, where you pop out to the menu and it's back to 30, same with the replays. And, you know, that's not nearly as important because, yeah, hitting solid 60 during the gameplay is key here, but I feel like maybe if we know that Forza 8 will probably be a thing, I would love to see them try to find ways to improve replay and menu performance just to get the entire package up to 60 frames per second.
I guess the payoff is that you're seeing the highest quality models and they can ramp up all of the effects up to the max. And GT Sport, we've seen that's, you know, doing a ton of extra stuff that just aren't available in game. But yeah, it would be great to have the full package there. And in terms of Forza 7, I really hope that they're doing that with the PC version. Then again though, you were at Gamescom, you saw that demo. Those intro sequences before the race begins, 30 Hz on Xbox One X, and on the PC version they were 30 Hz as well.
Ah, yes.
But you're right, I mean, it is basically the gameplay where 60 Hz is really key. And, you know, as the graph showed back there, it's just unwavering, it's completely locked. I mean, these guys are so wedded to getting a completely locked, silky smooth 60 frames per second experience.
We just don't see that much these days. It's really great.
Yeah, yeah, so I think, you know, that's kind of like the main takeaway that we have. We've seen the game twice now. We've seen it at E3, we've seen it at Gamescom. I think there are still some unknowns out there. First of all, we haven't seen the game running on a 1080p screen on Xbox One X. I actually downscaled the 4K footage here. The anti-aliasing is just looking flawless. I think there will be a win in it for the 1080p users as well. But I think the main kind of comparison point that we all really want to see is what the base Xbox One version of the game looks like. And we haven't seen anything on that yet. And I guess it won't really take that long for us to find out what's going on there, as we should be receiving review code fairly soon. Game's out on October the 3rd after all.
So, you know, I think that's kind of interesting because you have Project Cars 2, Forza 7, and then Gran Turismo Sport all hitting somewhat at the same time or roughly within the same period. So it's kind of like the ultimate racing showdown this fall, and I'm kind of curious to see how they all stack up.
Definitely, it's going to be a huge battle royale there. But anyway, yeah, I guess this is where we're going to leave it for now. Do hope you enjoyed this extra look at Forza Motorsport 7. We'll be back with more as soon as we can. But in the meantime, do like and subscribe if you want to support everything that Digital Foundry does. And, well, we'll see you next time.